Good morning, my name is Freedom. Something you probably don't realize is that white people are taught that our analysis is neutral and our voice belongs at the center, even in moments that aren't about us. I'm gonna try to unpack how white culture trains us to believe, even subconsciously, that our voices should lead. I'm gonna talk about how true solidarity is supporting work that comes without credit or control, and I'll go over a checklist to help you tell on your own if you're organizing or just performing. There are studies on performative allyship that describe white people taking low-cost, high-visible actions to protect image more than change conditions. Things like only sharing media and doing nothing to call out the things that they see in real life. Tone policing, the classic "I have black friends" response. They see you, and they keep you at a distance. Claiming colorblindness isn't great either. We have white fragility, where people feel too angry or guilty to actually focus on what changes can be made. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you have white exceptionalism, or white knighting, where a pasty patsy will claim that they're one of the good ones. Listen, white workers are also often treated as objective and professional, while others' emotions or perspectives get coded as too political or too emotional, reinforcing white views as the default standard. Also point out that we've been starting to get to a point that if you're not the right kind of white, then they don't like you either. A good question to ask yourself may be, why did it take the system treating white people badly to start doing something fucking about it? Research on teaching against white supremacy notes that curricula overwhelmingly center white historical perspectives. Other histories appear as add-ons, creating the sense that white viewpoints are the universal norm. Things like modern textbooks using language like "the settlers moved west" instead of naming the genocides, forced relocations, and land theft they committed. There was the Indian boarding system that unalived thousands of children through abuse, disease, and cultural destruction. These are just some of the atrocities white supremacy is committed, not to mention the Trail of Tears and the Tulsa Race Massacre. It's also how Black history is almost exclusively only talked about during Black History Month, which also happens to be the shortest month of the year. That alone can be attributed to white supremacy. Teachers having to adjust their curriculum because some racist white fuck doesn't like that their children learns about all of history. Even then, the focus still stays narrow, usually covering the bare minimum of things like the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr., and sometimes maybe George Washington Carver. There was an entire controversy about the fucking fact that Rosa Parks even existed. Kids close to graduating were saying that she was made up, and even if they were saying that for clout, it still shows how deep white supremacy goes into a normal citizen's life. I have witnessed people claiming that the Holocaust did not fucking happen. Sit with that one. This is because the teaching for it is either non-existent or just inconsistent. There are only 12 states that require Holocaust education, despite it being one of the most documented genocides in history. Can we really be surprised though at this point? The history that I was initially taught was so whitewashed that the westward expansion wasn't taught as a genocide. It was said that conquering was a God-given right, and that native resistance were attacks and wars instead of simply self-defense against fucking invasion. White settlers were portrayed as these brave pioneers, and that native people were obstacles, or for some kinder curriculums, tragic victims, not as nations defending their sovereignty. Asian American and Latinx histories are also almost entirely absent. Mexican American history is reduced to immigration issues with no context on stolen land, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, or other labor exploitations these families still face, the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps, Filipino labor movements are all rarely taught beyond a single paragraph. Whitewashing also makes it where white people are more likely to be trusted by institutions, get leadership roles, and even be framed as reasonable mediators. Even when repeating things by POC, people have said for years, guess what the fuck I'm doing right now? White people usually even get away with saying more radical shit on top of it without any fear of judgment or retaliation. From schoolwork to activism, we're simply rewarded for stepping up. We're rarely taught how to step back. That's not an accident. It's how white supremacy reproduces itself without you even realizing it. If you want to know what substantive, accountable solidarity looks like, it's transformative organizing work with white anti-racists that emphasizes long-term relationship building. It follows the leadership of impacted communities and focuses focuses on structure building rather than personal branding. Here are some tasks that can actually help and make a difference. You have rides, childcare, food, printing, phone calls, fundraising, using workplace leverage, sharing stipends, redirecting media and institutional attention towards bi-POC-led groups. We can use our privilege to show up where white presence reduces risk for others, like dealing with landlords, school boards, and other bureaucracies when we're asked to. Something to think about is that if your solidarity never costs you time, money, or reputation, it's probably about your reflection, not about redistribution, and actually making a difference. Are you organizing or performing? Here's some questions for you to help gauge where you're at. Be honest with yourself and make adjustments where you need to. A very basic first question is, would I still do this if no one saw it and no one thanked me? Studies on allyship note that performative forms are driven by desire for social approval and to avoid being seen as prejudiced, not by commitment to justice. Where does this action cost me something like time, opportunities, comfort, or relationships? Research on authentic allyship highlights that meaningful action involves tangible cost and willingness to confront issues where you see them. Who can tell me no or ask me to change direction? Radicals of color have long argued that white anti-racists must be accountable to bi-POC-led organizations and to collectives that can critique and correct them. When I talk about this work, am I narrating my feelings or the material needs and strategy of the people most impacted? Analysis of white allyship warns about allyship as identity, where the story becomes the white person's growth instead of structural change. Am I building something that can run without me? Transformative organizing theory says real organizing builds collective capacity, skills, structures, and relationships that aren't dependent on one person. If you fail most of this checklist, that doesn't mean quit, it means shift from performance to practice. White culture trains us to need the spotlight. The revolutionary act is to stay in the work after the spotlight moves on. Be sure to ask yourself, am I organizing or performing? All power to the people.